I'm Jerry Abbey. I'm head of marketing here at the Automation. And it's a great pleasure of working on the second annual State of Industrial DevOps report. Today, we're going to be looking at this, but from a critical angle that can make it a lot more useful for your organizations. And that's breaking it down and trying to benchmark it against what you're finding in your own organizations. So throughout this presentation, I'm going to be giving prompts and examples, the same ones which are at the end of the report, and then breaking down the data that we've got. And this is just to give an example scenario of how you can apply it realistically in your own space with your own teams and really take advantage of this rich, valuable data that you have here. Start off, I always like to lead with context, and I'll dive in the topic of what we're talking about. So this report is focused on industrial DevOps. That's where Cocoa Automation is focused and where I think a huge part of the future lies. So industrial DevOps, the application of lean, agile, and DevOps principles, the planning, development, manufacturing, service availability, cyber physical systems. It's a mouthful. What it is the evolution of taking really good processes and applying them to the reality of our modern systems. And DevOps was developed starting in about 2009, and that's been applied in that sense. And brought so many benefits to the software industry. And years ago, we started bringing that into the cyber physical space and manufacturing. We have machines, we have virtualization and softwares, all converging to create automation and gain efficiencies and develop. Now, second part that we added in here as iteration of the last 5 years as a business and talk to customers and really three analysts and work through what is meaningful for the realities of today. And that's industrial code lifecycle management. There is so much industrial code out there, more every day. We see the amount of devices in the space doubling every 5 years, and that's going to all of those devices, your PLC and standards, robots, the HMIs have the industrial code backbone. And for this reason, we need to treat it in a system and bring in that rigor of lifecycle management around it. And that includes automatically backing up the code so that we have the ability to recover, having version controls and know when things will change, and being able to drive that collaboration across teams so they can work together and improve. Now, just a big one click deeper, and then we're going to move into benchmarking. The reality of what we're looking at today, especially talking with enterprise organization, which is where this report is really focused, is you have a mix of locations. Some have come through and we have all of these different devices that need to be tracked. According to our report, average, it's over 4,000. That's over 2,000 PLCs and over 2,000 associated devices in the space. You have a mix of engineers working on this, technicians working on these devices. Because of the nature of having different planes in different locations, having availability of hardware at different times, you likely have a mix of PLC vendors. For this hypothetical example, say you have 60% Siemens, 30% Rockwell, 5% Genesis, and 5% probably not, mostly working in that. This is the reality we see today. And you have all sorts of different versions on those PLCs that are working. A lot of organizations still working for net backups, ad hoc version control, as we'll see in the data that we unpack. A lot of Excel spreadsheets for version control, which can get unwieldy and inconsistent quickly. And then if you do have a third-party issue, you might have some backups and just inconsistency still, because there's so many devices and there are not a lot of modern systems that can handle all of this. And then the crux of all of this is OT cyber vulnerability, because the surface area continues to increase, it becomes increasingly difficult to monitor it, and you have outdated backups on code changes, limited or no recovery. And today's possibility, I'm not going to talk through all of this because that's what we're going to be looking at in the benchmark data. But really thinking about all these things, build OT cyber resilience. Thinking about these things, get your organization on board, have a clear, rapid recovery plan that's also been tested and tried so that you know it works, that you can find the faults in it and then continue to iterate on it. We live in a living, breathing space that is changing, driving centralization and being vendor agnostic, access and control. You have some of the the last slide for this introduction, thinking about what this space looks like, comparing it with what's getting into the feed over most of the decade. You have these DevOps instances, IT established it with the operating system databases, and backup in the disaster. In there, it's stable states, and in the OT states, we've had metric factories, networking, and then moving about years ago to asset management, which has finally become data sets. We've seen that places, in most places, clearly built immediately events, and that includes that security and now the ability, because you can see all those assets to come in and the back end the heat that they're pulling the event from catastrophic weather event, a cyber attack, a hardware malfunction, a human error. But having that bill. So in this guide, we're going to be focusing most of our time on step one here, assessing current state and key methods. And then we're going to touch on 2 to 5, the other pieces that we can do. Why benchmark? It really helps with identifying strengths and weaknesses, validating from challenging internal conventions. One of the things that we see in a lot of slides here is a differentiation between C-suite view versus what managers receive. And it's really important to bring that to the surface and get really talk it out. Figure out what is the best plan for, especially as we look at investments, very large investments for the space. Building a data-driven business case, that's the value of having this and other data in reports, help contextualize that conversation, help prioritize initiatives, and to drive the conversations that will hopefully foster internal work. So this is taken straight from the report. When you download the report, if you haven't already, you see this within it. I have it all broken out on the slide and go through the piece by piece. So the first one, the cost of downtime. I find this to be the biggest hot button topic and the biggest differentiation between where C-suite's perspective is and where managers is. So while your downtime number may not necessarily align with the numbers that we have on this report, the real important thing here is that downtime, no matter what your number is a huge and pressing theme for your organization that needs to be avoided. And this gives you some data and a starting point to drive that discussion and uncover things like, is there a disparity between what people are counting in their downtime? So this is a comparison to what we found in the last 2 years. If you look in the lower right corner, you see that there's a difference of about 500,000 in the lower right corner year over year. Most of that difference is driven by the C-suite perspective. What I'm inferring from the data from this and other reports is perhaps there's modernization that has helped with less of a high threshold in the concerns around downtime. But this is something that we'll continue to closely monitor year over year. What it really focused in on, though, is that year over year disparity between how managers are calculating downtime and how C-suite is calculating downtime. That is a huge difference. And from discussions I've had and digging into this data, I think a lot of it is that broader perspective where the manager sees the downtime and the connectivity to a line or multi-lines, and less where the C-suite is seeing the cost of bringing in insurance companies and filing claims, the lawyers coming in, the potential safety issue being investigated, the broader scope of things and the impact on their supply chain, but also have an impact on the stock price if they are followed. But much more cascading impacts. And when you have that differentiation, can be problematic when you're thinking about what is the critical area to invest to remediate to any given time. So next, thinking about downtime attribution. Year over year, we've seen pretty strong consistency tied to industrial code. And this is looking at all downtime, planned and unplanned. 45% of all downtime is attributed to industrial code. Thinking about this, sitting down with the team, ask yourselves, what is our number for industrial code? Is downtime being driven by it? Yes, no, why? What we're seeing and highlighted here in red is the larger the organization, the more complex the organization, there's higher and higher attribution to industrial code driving downtime. It rings really true for the total revenue. 15+ billion respondents had it pegged at 66% of all downtime attributed to industrial code. When you go over 1,000 PLCs, 60% attributed to industrial code. When you look at total cost per hour of downtime, those who responded 5 million plus per hour of downtime attributed 70% of that downtime to industrial code. That complexity comes unwieldy at a certain threshold, and when you're managing version control and spreadsheets, when you are manually backing things up, it continues to cascade the complexity and difficulty to manage that downtime, to recover from that downtime, to prevent it from happening again. Now, when you're thinking about primary causes of downtime, year over year, we saw cybersecurity breaches as the #1 cause. This year, cybersecurity breaches also tied with coding and software issues and hardware malfunctions. We also saw a differentiation between managers and the C-suite on the prioritization and concerns around cybersecurity. When you're planning with your team, looking at this data, bringing in other data, think about those types of discrepancies and ask those types of questions to try and reveal what perspectives may be different, so you can come to a common ground and try and identify what are the biggest issues. If it's cybersecurity breaches, cybersecurity attacks, or just generally the fold of cyber and concerns to prevent that happening, how do you address it? Look at the top things that might be causing it, look at things that are slowing things down, and try and bring in something to remediate that problem. Same thing with hardware, with coding and software issues. Next, thinking about industrial DevOps. If you're on this call, hopefully you have an interest or are actively in industrial DevOps. What we found this year is a huge amount of investment happening in the next 11 months. 53% were already invested or actively piloting industrial DevOps platforms in some way. 92% plan to have an industrial DevOps platform in place by the end of this year, the next 11 months. If you are doing this already, great. If you are not doing this, it's a great time to look at this data and prioritization and think about when you put them forward. And we'll dig in a little deeper in the next one. This shows the data around the industrial DevOps adoption. It really seems to have reached the tipping point. In the report, I also put a timeline. And when you look at the introduction of DevOps to gaining mainstream traction within IT, it took about 7 years. Where we're at right now is about the 5-year mark with industrial DevOps, and just year over year in the data for this report, we've seen a huge change in the rate of adoption, the speed of adoption, and change overall in market reception to it. Next, thinking about the challenges. There's always challenges to adopting any type of software. And while this is focused on DevOps, this can cascade to anything that you're planning to move forward with. Change management typically is the number one. And that's why I include all the choices within the report here, because for your organization, it could be, typically is a mix of things. Change management is always there. When you bring in a change, there's always some type of resistance. So not surprising to see that at number one. Then competing priorities, which was the number one last year, it's always difficult. And that's why we're looking at this data and thinking about questions that can help with prioritizing. Lack of budget to fund an initiative, which is another way to say competing priorities, because someone has the budget somewhere and it's going into that priority. Lack of need to manage code more effectively. This is something I see all the time. The way that we are doing things works, but other data within this report showed that 81% of organizations are frequently doing ad hoc fixes. We're also seeing a correlation to ad hoc fixes and the amount of downtime. When you are fighting fires all the time, it's impossible to improve in a meaningful way. Bringing in a system that can help remove that need to fight fires and allow everyone to focus on more value-added work can be hugely impactful. And part of the discussion, as you group up your teams and dig into this data, should be focused around what amount of time are we spending on this today, what amount of time could we save in the future, and how do we put a number around that, and then redirect that into something else. This is a great piece of data thinking about how you are managing industrial code today. And think about how you are in your organization doing it. What we saw in the data today is an overwhelming amount of software with 13 different packages of software on average within the OT space. We also saw that 40% of respondents still rely on manual spreadsheets. As I mentioned earlier, very difficult to version control within spreadsheets. Even if you feel like you have a good system in there, one person managing it or a couple of people who are very aligned, one person goes on vacation, one person forgets to do something, one person goes out on sick leave. It becomes a problem very quickly because it's not centralized in a way where everybody is working in the same thing and it's tracked comprehensively. 27% of our respondents admitted to having informal or ad hoc files on local drives. A lot of this goes to that point of what we have today works. And I just want to flag this because in your internal discussion, you take this data and you go and try to have a meaningful discussion and build a benchmark to work around, redirect investment. Just think about how much these types of systems are hampering progress. And beyond hampering progress within your organization. How is it impacting the recruitment? When you're thinking about getting top talent or any talent to fill these very vital roles for keeping your organization producing, when they come in and see a spreadsheet that you're managing industrial code in versus a system that's comprehensive and collaborative, something that automatically backs up, so they're not going to be walking around with their computer, with a USB stick and trying to back up files and then save them on centralized drive. How is that going to impact their perception of this workplace? Now, AI is a huge part of this discussion, and thinking about AI and OT is extremely important for so many different reasons. We're going to touch on that in data. Asking yourselves, do we want AI in the team? If we do, what guardrails do we need around it? How can we put those guardrails in? How can we meaningfully protect our environment and also accelerate our production? So no surprise, the top concern is data security and privacy when asked about AI in the OT space, followed by integration with existing systems and reliability of those AI algorithms. A lot of concern about the reliability of AI today and the safety and security of pulling it into. Now, another part very much on the pro side of having AI in your OT is thinking about managing these many devices and the diversity of the devices. For just PLCs alone, we see an average of 6 different PLC vendors and types within the OT environment. When we ask more about what's the most valuable AI-driven feature that could be in industrial DevOps, AI-driven version control with change detection and anomaly alerts is number 1. So real conflict in trusting AI and bringing it into the space versus wanting AI to do things that are very important and vital for the success of the organization. Change detection, anomaly alerts, this is vital for helping to react quickly if a ransomware attack begins, if there is a cyber event. And just in general, being able to manage the unwieldy nature of today's OT environment. Now, we've just gone through some of the key stats. There are many more within the report. If some of these stats weren't particularly the ones that you want to focus in on, there are many others. But the real goal is to lay out some of these and think about what questions to ask, how to get people into a room, and how to uncover existing conflicts and drive that uniformity forward so that you can make a decision and invest for the success of your organization. So moving forward, you want to identify those perception gaps and misalignments and help understand downtime cost and code execution, or whatever is driving your down. Resolution times and debugging time, how much time you spend on that, and what impact does that have on your workforce? Confidence in your inventory. Do you know what assets you have? Do you know where they are? Do you know which ones are high priority versus low priority? How is IT and OT collaborating today? Is it effective? What could make it more effective? Look for finding and uncovering things that are not working today and ways to drive alignment in the future. Next, prioritize areas for improvement. Are there high-cost areas? Are you finding downtime in a certain area? What is it attributed to? Use the 5 whys technique. Really uncover, is it that surface thing? And also look for alignment of people who know that area best against others within the organization who might be attributing that to something else. Look for any cybersecurity discrepancies. Do you have a prioritization for securing your OT infrastructure, your network, all of the assets, your entire space? Also, look for resolving the paradoxes that you uncover throughout this process. Keep a list of them, put them to the side if you can't fix them within the moment. Hard work to dig in on all of this, and it's important to recognize that you can't solve everything right away. And some things might need to be from the parking lot to revisit. Or develop a tailored plan. You've done the work. Step one is the hardest part. And then really digging in beyond that and pushing conversations, opening up, getting people to share. And now that you've uncovered all those things, drive towards this plan that is cross-collaborative and connecting the leadership, getting IT, OT, and cybersecurity, your executives, your board, to align on this mission to address whatever you need to within your organization to stay competitive and profitably grow. Lastly, you put this plan into action, you've moved forward. Always, always, always monitor progress and iterate. This is a living, breathing environment that you're working in, and it's important to realize that a solution last year might not be the best solution today, and you might need to adapt it better fit the operations that continue to grow and change. Track your metrics in the whole process, make sure that everybody has agreed on what success looks like, and then check in. Ask, does success still look like it did last week, last month, last year? Revisit reports. The State of Industrial DevOps report is an annual one. Revisit this, revisit other ones. There's lots of great OT cybersecurity reports out there, ransomware reports, and others. So you can understand what the changes are, the trends are, and how you can adapt your strategy. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. I really appreciate your time for joining me here today. If you have not downloaded the State of Industrial DevOps report yet, you can use this QR code to download it now. I'll give it just another minute. If there are no questions, then I will end the webinar. Thank you so much for joining me today. All right, I'm going to throw my email in the chat. If any of you do have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. And thank you again for joining. I really appreciate your time. I wish you the best of success with taking this and adapting it for your own benefit. Thank you.